Hi, and thanks for joining me today for this presentation entitled The Art and Science of Pricing Products. I'm Dr. Bridget Behe. I'm a professor of horticultural marketing at Michigan State University and delighted to be a part of the program today. You know, the concept of price really is an interesting one. It's defined as the outlay customers make to obtain a desired product or service. But what it really means is that the item, the plant, the container, whatever the product or service is, has value both from the buyer's perspective and from the seller's perspective. And when that value perception is the same, that's when we get a sale. So when we talk about the art and science of pricing, what we're really talking about is understanding how to assess the value from both the buyer's perspective and from the seller's perspective. So let's go to the science side first. And the science side of setting prices really has to do a lot with costs and tracking costs. And there's an old adage, that which gets measured gets managed. And I really believe that because the things that we do measure, even imperfectly, really are managed much better. And I also think that tracking costs is a bit like exercise. You have a lot of choices. And I really enjoy running. It's my favorite form of exercise, but a lot of my friends don't understand my love of running. And so tracking costs is a lot like exercise. You have to find the one method that you really like and then use it, because there are so many different ways to track costs out there. It is very much like exercise, but you have to use it. You've got to find a cost tracking system that you like and then use it. There are several cost accounting software sources out on the market today, and I have a few of them listed here. The Virtual Grower has one, Flowers on Time has one, and at Michigan State University we've developed one. And so there's a couple of alternatives there. Rutgers also has a good cost accounting software, as does the University of Massachusetts. Let me review a couple things about the cost side, and I'm citing an article here that Paul Fisher, Alan Hodges, Bill Swanekamp, and Charlie Hall published a few years ago. And so the first thing I want to point out is that the direct costs, or the costs that go into directly growing or producing the crop, account for about a third of total cost of production. Labor costs account for another approximately third of total production costs, and then overhead costs account for another approximately third of the total production costs. So we really got these three buckets. We've got direct costs, we've got labor costs, and we've got overhead costs. I need to get a cost figure for an example, so I'm going to use this 4.5-inch wave petunia. And what Paul, Alan, Bill, and Charlie determined in this case was that the total direct cost for this 4.5-inch wave petunia was 25 cents, and the overhead cost was 45 cents. So I'm going to set the profit aside for now and just say that the total cost of production between the direct costs and the overhead cost, and these would include labor, is 70 cents. So let's take that 70 cents and do a little bit of math with it to calculate what a price might be. One of the most common ways to calculate a price is a formula method. One of the most common formulas for calculating price is markup on cost. And the equation for calculating that is the retail price minus the cost divided by the cost. The reason we say markup on cost is because cost goes in the denominator. If our formula pricing says that we're going to mark things up 300% on cost and our cost is 70 cents, we need to figure out what the retail price is. So we can do some algebra and figure out that the retail price should be $2.80, or we could simply multiply by 4. It's 1 plus whatever the markup is, and 300% is a markup of 3 times. So we just multiply by 4 to get the retail price for the markup on cost at 300%. Now, another place that we can use that 70% cost figure is to determine the break-even point. And we typically think about making 40 cents or 50 cents per container, or we think about a profit margin of 40% or 25%, whatever that is. But we don't necessarily make that specific profit on every container, because the break-even point is the point at which the company has paid all the direct costs of that particular product. It's literally the point where you generate no profit, but that's where you begin to generate profit. It's the unit after the break-even point where we really start to make money. So let me give you an example. So if we grew 5,000 4.5-inch petunia plants that each cost 70 cents to grow, the first question we have to ask ourselves, is it possible to sell all 5,000 plants? And probably it's not. So talking about shrink or loss is a whole different category, a whole different talk, but it's important to think about it at this point because we still have to account for the direct and indirect costs of all 5,000 of those plants. So in thinking about where the break-even point is, what we're really asking is, how many plants do we need to sell in order to recover all of the cost, the total cost? So we're going to think about 3 price points. We're going to think about $1.99, $2.99, and $3.99. Let's just set the formulas aside for now. Let's set price points aside for now. These are the places that these are the areas where we're thinking about pricing those petunias. So where is the break even for each price? We first have to figure out the total cost of production, and we've already seen that it costs us 70 cents to grow each of those 4.5-inch containers times the 5,000 units, so we know our total cost of production is $3,500. So how many plants do we need to sell in order to break even with a retail price of $1.99? Well, it's pretty easy math. We take the 3,500 divided by the $1.99, and we end up with 1,758.79. Well, that 0.58 of a plant looks pretty funny, so we're going to round up to 1,759 plants, and that's our break-even point in units. So when we sell the 1,760th plant, we begin to generate revenue. How many plants do we need to break even at a $2.99 retail price? Well, it's similar math, 3,500 divided by $2.99, but now we see we only need to sell 1,170 plants as the break-even point. Another way to look at this is to think about the percentage of product that we need to sell in order to break even. And this is pretty easy to do in an Excel spreadsheet. So the first column looks at the retail prices. The second column estimates how many plants we're going to sell. And we're going to try to sell 4,000 of the 5,000 plants because we're going to have some for losses, but also some for donations and other uses. So the third column shows us the total sales, and this column shows us the break-even point in units. And then what we see here are the percentage of plants that we need to sell in order to break even. And you see it dramatically declines as we dramatically increase the price. The opposite side of break even is a way that we could look at the effect of sales and discounts on overall profit. If we set a price of $3.99 for that 4.5-inch geranium and did not use a discount, if we sold all 4,000, we would generate $12,460. Now, let's say we put some on sale for 10% off. We're going to reduce our revenue and we're going to generate 12.8% less profit. 10% usually is not enough to get someone to act on a sale, but 25% off usually is. But now we're generating substantially less profit, and when we go to a 50% off, we're generating even less profit. So looking at the effect of sales and discounts and calculating the break-even point are two other pieces of information that we can use to help us establish a retail price for the plants. Now, I want to go back to the formula, the markup on cost. Should a formula have the last word on setting a price? Well, before I answer that question, let's look at a study that Tom Dudek and I did several years ago where we collected the beginning price information on 3 basic items sold in retailers on the west side of Michigan. All of the stores in the study were single unit freestanding, so we didn't have any multi-location stores and no box stores. We collected the starting price or the retail price as of the first week in May, which is in Michigan our starting price, on a 4-inch vegetative annual, a 10-inch single item hanging basket, and a 36 count flat. So what I want to focus on today is going to be the starting prices for the 4-inch vegetative annuals. So first, let's look at how close of a geography this study was done in. So we only had 5 counties in Michigan participating in the study, and we had quite a number of stores, but they were really close in geography to each other, centered around Grand Rapids. And truthfully, customers could easily drive to almost all of these locations. It might be a little bit of a drive to go from one of the extreme counties to another, but really it was about a 45-minute drive to get to just about any of these retailers. Now here's what I want to show you. This is the starting price in 2010 for a 4-inch single item vegetative annual. And what I want you to notice is the low price is $1.25, and each of these bars represents one retailer, and the high price is $5.29. So the question I want to ask, could input cost alone account for the $4.04 price spread for that single item vegetative 4-inch annual? Well, the answer is probably not. So what I want you to realize from this slide is that formula pricing is a starting point. It really isn't the end point. And I'm going to talk about the perceived value, about what lies above the rim of the container in just a couple of minutes. But when we price things by the container itself, we're really taking away any additional perception of value that we could be building for anything that's happening above the rim of the container. One of the reasons that we did this study was to show retailers the vast difference in pricing, even on some items as similar or as interchangeable as a 4-inch single item container. Another thing that I want to talk about relative to formula pricing are price points. When you are setting a price, I want you to think about how close you can get to these price points or price barriers. For example, why would you price something at 97 cents when you should price it at 99 cents? Now, those 2 cents may not seem like a lot, but when you multiply that by thousands of units, you really are starting to generate some more profit. Psychologically, we know that these are key price points that when we go above them, like let's say $1.59 or $1.69, in most cases, people don't perceive a difference between $1.79 and $1.99, especially for a lot of the plant material that we're selling, because people only buy it once a year, maybe twice a year, but they don't have a good memory about what they paid the prior year. Now, that's not to say that everyone has a bad memory, but by and large, most customers will perceive these as price barriers, that if we are going to increase the price from $4.99 to $9.99, that is a big jump. but why not go to $6.99 or $8.99 before we hit the barrier at $9.99? So think about the price point and try to get as close to these barriers as you can as you increase the price of some of your products. So that was the cost side and really the consideration of how we calculate price. But I want to go now to the other side, the consumer perspective, and really talk about value and that perception of price. Value is a lot like beauty. It is in the eye of the beholder. It really is a matter of perspective. And sometimes we can shape that perspective. And the reason I show you this slide is we can see two perspectives here. We might see an older woman with her mouth and her chin, and here's her nose. But for the young woman, this is her shawl, and here's her nose and her eyelash and her hair and her ear. And once you see both of those perspectives, it's really hard not to see them. And so what I want to try to do is to get you to adopt the consumer perspective for just a few minutes to understand their value perception. So there are typically 5 ways that people can see or perceive or retailers would assign value. And I want to talk about each of these individually. The first way is functional value, and these are the features or the attributes or the characteristics of the product. Really what we're talking about is how it performs. Now, I have echinacea here on the left and Asclepias here on the right. And if we think about the functional value of both of these plants, they do a pretty good job at attracting pollinators. But we know that the Asclepias is called butterfly weed, and so for that reason, it probably has greater functional value in terms of attracting pollinators. So if we were thinking about the outcomes or consequences, the environmental benefits, Asclepias may outweigh echinacea in terms of its perceived value. Most often, retailers, plant professionals migrate to the functional value or the characteristics of the plant because that's what they know the best. But we tend to forget the other elements of perceived value. The second way that we can generate value in a plant is through its epistemic value. And this would be the novelty or the sensory value. One of the reasons that I have lilies in this slide is because lilies are often quite fragrant, and there are many people who find that fragrance very attractive. Not people with allergies, but many people who enjoy the fragrance of a flower might be willing to pay a little bit more if they knew it was fragrant. That's an experiment that you might try, putting a premium on some of the plants that have a fragrance. Purple carrots have been around for a while, this petunia's been around for a while, but they're novel, they're different, they're not typical. And so again, what we see here is an opportunity to increase the price of these novel or interesting plants, mainly because they haven't been in the marketplace that long, and so they're not typical. They're not what we're used to seeing. Especially when we have new or novel cultivars, they're often in very high demand. And the reason for this is reflected in the product life cycle and the product adoption curve. The product life cycle shows us sales over time. Sales are the blue line, profits are the green line. We know that sales start out kind of slowly, they grow, they end up in the mature stage where they begin to decline, and profits kind of follow along, although peak profits usually happen at the end of the growth phase of the product life cycle. But we also know that different people buy at different times. The innovators are usually the first 2 to 5% to buy a product. They're the people that we often see standing in line, especially outside the Apple Store, if we're talking about the latest release of the iPhone. But we also have innovators in terms of plant purchasers, and they're followed by the early adopters, which is usually about 12 to 15% of the market. They're followed by the early majority and the late majority. Well, we know the innovators buy early in the introduction phase of the product life cycle, and some of the early adopters buy at that point. But the thing that distinguishes the innovators from the early adopters, or one of the things that distinguishes them, is their willingness to pay a premium price. Innovators are very few in number, but they're very much willing to pay a higher price because they have to have the newest, the latest, and the greatest. Early adopters are willing to pay somewhat of a higher price, but they want the innovators to really pave the road. They want to see that this plant cultivar is really going to grow in their climate, that they still want to be early, but they don't want to be among the very first. So if we know innovators and early adopters are willing to pay a premium price, we really need to set the price of these new or novel cultivars relatively high, because that's who is going to be attracted to the plant, not the early majority or the late majority. The late majority is waiting for things to go on sale, and the laggards are in the dumpster pulling plants out that you want to send to the compost pile. So once we understand the dynamics of the product life cycle and the product adoption curve, it really makes us understand better how and why we should be pricing plants with epistemic value, particularly if they're new or novel. Another element of perceived value is conditional value, and this is really the symbolism or meaning of different things, and the red rose is the American floral symbol. But in today's economy, people really are proud of being plant parents. There's pretty high conditional value to having a lot of foliage plants or succulents. And some of us might think that's silly, but the conditional value, the symbolism of being a plant parent, means that I'm someone who's nurturing and caring. I may not have real children. I may not even have four-legged furry children, but I am a plant parent, and I want to be considered somebody who's nurturing. Don't think badly about people who want to call themselves plant parents, because what they're saying is that the symbolism there is of owning plants is very, very important to them, very much like being a parent. Emotional value is the fourth way that we can enhance perceived value. Does the customer get joy or a positive feeling from buying or having or owning, or if it's an edible herb or a vegetable producing plant, eating the product? And so we know, particularly coming out of COVID, that people do get a lot of social and emotional value from having plants. Doctors Charlie Hall and Melinda Knuth summarize the research-based information that helps us show customers, both online and in person, how plants bring benefits to their lives. And so if you need a copy of these articles, I'm very happy to share them with you. Just send me an email and ask for the plant benefits articles. And I mentioned social value. That's our fifth element of perceived value, that when the customer buys the product, it can help enhance their perception in the eyes of others. And this is really where, especially coming out of COVID, plants have a lot of traction, because plants are a gathering point, a meeting point, a rallying point where we can connect with other people that we like a lot. And I've got a couple of pictures here of some exorbitant, outrageous prices for plants. And one of the reasons that people want to do this, now it doesn't take very many people to buy that $5,000 plant. In fact, most of us would be surprised if they even sold one. But they don't need to sell very many to make a pretty hefty profit. But my point for the social value is that the fear of missing out is real, FOMO, or the fear of missing out. And when my friends are posting about their plants on Instagram, I really want to have that plant so that I look cool and hip, and really I am in with my... In fact, we did some research with Dr. Dominic Newman to show that people who used Instagram more were more likely to experience the fear of missing out, and we actually used Monstera as one of the products, one of the two products in that particular study. So here we see 5 different ways that we can enhance the perceived value from the customer's perspective, and most of us really aren't using them. So let's move into how do we communicate that value. So we could do it through one of 3 ways, or usually one of 3 ways. We either do it through search attributes, experience attributes, or credence attributes. So search attributes are those things that are pretty easy to evaluate before the customer makes the purchase. These are things like, what color are the leaves? What's the shape of the flower or the shape of the leaf? And how tall does it get? How big are the flowers? And price is absolutely one of the most important search attributes. But again, these are things that we can readily see or evaluate at the point of purchase. A second way that we can communicate value is through experience attributes. These are things like if we're marketing fresh greens, if they taste peppery like arugula, if the bell peppers are sweet, if the radicchio is bitter or crunchy. The experience attributes often can only be evaluated after somebody buys the product. And this, truthfully, is why we see so many demonstrators in supermarkets, pre-COVID, not so much anymore. Marketers understand that if they get it in somebody's mouth, a grocery item, that oftentimes it ends up in the cart, because what they're doing is they're communicating the experience attributes. The third way that we communicate value is through credence attributes, and these are really tough to evaluate even after purchase. It's very difficult for someone to tell if that plant was sustainably grown or organically grown. It's very difficult to understand the carbon footprint that that plant has. Was it shipped in from Washington State, or was it grown at a local nursery? Customers really have to rely on the plant brand or the reputation of the seller, or I would strongly argue some signage to help people understand what those credence attributes are. So I mentioned a couple of minutes ago about pricing products by container size. When we do this, what we're communicating to our customers is that all of the value lies in that root ball below the rim of the container. We take away all of the perceived value that is happening up here above the rim of the container. Now, I understand why we do that. It makes life much easier for our very difficult to find and keep labor. But we take away almost all of the elements of perceived value when we sell containers that way. Something else to think about is the signage. And when we focus on features, which really are the technical aspects or the functional value, we focus on things that we know a lot about. We tell people that this plant goes in full sun, here's how far apart to space it, here's how tall it grows, and here's something that you might want to know that would help you grow that plant. It's really a focus on the technical aspects. And if we think about it, that's really the focus on the functional value alone. How do we sell a $12 grafted tomato plant? We have to focus on benefits or what those features mean to the customer. It's those other value dimensions. You get more tomatoes, improved resistance to pest diseases and plant stresses, stronger growth, larger fruits, and a longer harvest season. If you just told people, here's how tall this plant grows, here's how far apart to space it, and here's what color the fruit is, it probably would get passed up. But you see here, in order to sell a $12 tomato plant, we really have to focus on the benefits and go far beyond the features. In fact, we did a study that showed if we put different information on the sign, if we just talked about what the plant was, or we put a feature or a benefit on there, and we also varied where that information was, what we were able to show was that it was really the benefit information at the highest price point that helped to sell or create the highest purchase intention for those plants. These were all digitally identical plants, and so at a low price point, to get the highest purchase intention, we just needed the price information alone. At a moderate price point, it was the combination of the feature and the benefit that helped to sell the plant the most. And at the high price point, it was really the benefit information that helped to create the greatest purchase intention. In other words, we really need to be thinking beyond the functional value of the plants and going into other elements of perceived value, especially things that could be communicated by experience and credence attributes. This is really a pretty good sign because what we see here are benefits, benefits, and benefits. And many benefits are experience attributes and credence attributes. Very difficult to tell until we experience them ourselves or we trust the information that the seller is giving us. So again, when we think about communicating the benefits of plants, Doctors Charlie Hall and Melinda Knuth have done a great job at compiling a lot of the research-based information that helps document that these are actual benefits that the plants generate in people's lives. And if you used one of these benefits every week, you probably could easily go through an entire year and not duplicate any of the benefits. These articles are available free on Charlie's website, or you can email me at behe@msu.edu and ask for the benefits articles. So moving in a little bit further into the perception of value from the consumer's perspective, we know that consumers have a lot on their minds, and they often really are not entirely rational. It's interesting that some companies will maybe take a little bit of advantage of this, and Coca-Cola is not the only one that did this, but there are soda pop machines that I don't know that they're still on the market today, but I know they were at one time, where the price would fluctuate by the ambient air temperature because they were difficult to restock. And they knew that demand would go up as the temperature went up. So some ingenious engineer decided to link the price with the ambient air temperature, and you can see the escalation in the profit when something like that occurs. We might say, gosh, Bridget, I'd never pay that much money for a can of soda, and I agree with you. But not everyone thinks the same way that you do. And if you wouldn't pay that much, it doesn't mean that someone else wouldn't pay that much. And especially as we look at some micro-marketing trends where we're even more refined in terms of our target market than a niche market, these micro-marketing or highly localized segments, especially when they're accessed through things like Facebook and Instagram, really can generate a profitable opportunity for us. Chris Beatty's, in his June 26th of last year, his blog, talked about an Instagram advertised sale that Vandermeer Nursery conducted, and it's interesting that they posted a rare Hoya release on a Saturday morning, posted the information on Friday night, and that customers came about 6:45 in the morning. The store didn't open until 8, and by 8:30 they had sold over 500 plants, and these are not large plants, at $20 each. A couple of things that this event really brings to mind. Here we see the power of social media. Here we see the realization of a micro market because we didn't advertise this as a sale. We advertise this as here's a rare or unusual plant opportunity. Some might argue these are not entirely rare plants. Here's an opportunity to buy an unusual plant, and I'm sure that it was shared many, many times. We see that it's got over 1,000 likes, and it generated a tremendous profit potential for this particular nursery. Now, I will argue they probably did need to cultivate their followers, and they probably have a very loyal following. They're probably pretty savvy in terms of Instagram marketing, but it worked, and it didn't work just because it worked because they believed that there were enough people out there who were willing to pay $20 for those plants, and they could always come down on the price. If they didn't sell them at $20, they could always lower that price without putting them on sale. It really points back to the fear of missing out, or FOMO, which is the anxiety or unease about others having fun without you. Particularly for social media users, it is a desire to have what others appear to have. And here is the study that I mentioned a few minutes ago with Dominic Newman, Pat Huddleston, and I, investigating the role of Instagram participation on the fear of missing out. And what we see up here is that fear of missing out really climbs when we are avid Instagram users. And I did want to show you that Monstera was one of the plants that we used in the particular study. Another way to look at perceived value is branding. And I know that for some, this is a pretty contentious issue right now, but this was a study that we did several years ago. We did this with about 1,000 consumers. We didn't show them all of these plants at the same time. We showed each of these slides in some other slides, and we asked them which plant of each of the three, which of these is of the highest quality, or are they about the same? Now, if you look closely at these plants, what you'll notice is they are all digitally identical. Even the little flower on the pepper is the same spot, the same size. It's identical. We varied the brand name and we varied the container color. And for this particular question, we were interested in their perception of quality. And what we found was that 60.1% of our sample said that the plants were of equal quality. However, 28.1% of the sample said that the plants were not of equal quality, and it was the branded plants that were of higher quality. 11.8% of the sample said that they were not equal in quality, and it was the generic plant that was of higher quality. Now, we did this study not to fool people, but to show you the perception that some people have about branded products. Now, 60% of the market said they were equal quality, so we really weren't fooling anyone. But for digitally identical plants to get 28% of the market to say that the branded plants were of higher quality, that is a significant finding, because what we see here is the brand communicating a promise of quality above the generic. What I think we see happening with the 11.8% who said they were not of equal quality and the generic plant was of higher quality, I think they're the price shoppers. I think they're the people who are looking for a bargain. They may be the late majority or the laggards who really want to find a good deal, but it is intriguing for digitally identical plants that we could get 28% of the market to say that those plants were of higher quality. So at the end of the day, we have to really consider from the customer's perspective, what is that plant, that container, what is that worth? Absolutely, you have to think about the cost, and you need to consider the break-even point, and you need to consider the price point. We also need to make comparisons more difficult, and that's why I have the shoes there. In marketing, we know there are products called signpost items. Those are things like a gallon of milk or a gallon of gas or a 4-inch geranium or a 6-inch poinsettia. Those are the very common products where people are easily able to compare prices. And when we put plants in larger containers and different size containers, it makes those comparisons difficult. And that's really where we can nudge the price point up. We really have to be thinking about the art of pricing. That answers the question, what is that worth? Can you raise prices? There's a lot of fear and trepidation about raising prices, especially in today's economy. But I think it's a great time to do some experimentation because the price of just about everything is going up. But raise prices on products that are not easily compared. I think that's really important that you stay away from the signpost items, and you'll know the signpost items because that's what people are calling to check prices on. So it's going to be more difficult, but not impossible, to raise prices on signpost items. And I want you to experiment and identify how many people push back and also calculate the sales. And I want to talk for a minute about how we did a study that shows that you are more likely better off by selling fewer units at a higher price point. So back in 2011, Marco Palma, Charlie Hall, and I worked with Carol Miller at Today's Garden Center, and we recruited 3 reputable independent garden centers. We used both branded plants, which we called the test plants, and non-branded plants, which we called the control plants. And we adjusted the prices of the test plants over 3 weeks during the spring season early on. Most retailers would start at a high price and go down, and what we did was we took the branded or the test plants, and the first week they were 10% lower compared to the control plants or the generics or the non-branded plants. Week 2, we had them at the same price point, and week 3, the test plants or the branded plants were priced 10% higher. The price of the unbranded or the control or the generic, those were held constant. And we had a really nice mix of roses and perennials and annuals. We didn't have any trees or shrubs in this. We wanted to keep the price points relatively low because we wanted to understand what is the effect of raising the price. So Marco actually did the math on this, and he was able to show that total revenue generated by the garden centers in the study during that 3-week time period by raising prices 10% per week was 2.3% higher despite selling 8.27% fewer units. The bottom line is the stores in this study sold fewer units and generated more profit. They worked smarter, not harder. Now, Marco also did the reverse math, and he was able to show that total revenue could have decreased 27% if we had reverse engineered this and gone down in terms of the price point. So you can increase prices, and you should be thinking about experimenting with that, especially if you have a great point of sale system. You know, this is an easy way to calculate the consumer response to price increases. If we have a certain number of people buying vegetables or roses or perennials, whatever that is, we can look at the change in the number of units sold and the number of dollars, or the units sold and the number of profits, and make some calculations. And so it is not an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's actually pretty easy math if you've got a pretty good point of sale system. You might also think about a value menu for the coming spring. If you're concerned about price increases, give customers an option. And maybe you identify a $1, a $2, and a $3 option that is on your value menu. Maybe you choose a little bit different price point. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is it is an essential part of the value proposition to have something that may not be perceived as incredibly valuable, but still would meet a need for some consumers. And I'll finish with this quote by the late Will Carlson. And we were visiting a grower retailer here in Michigan. And they were lamenting increasing the prices, and we were discussing some of the math while standing there, and the retailer realized they were selling at a loss, and Will said, well, what do? Will you write each customer a check or tape a dime to each container you sell? And that was an incredibly powerful visual for me, thinking about a dime taped to every container that went out the door. So give some thought to the art and science of pricing products and think about those elements of perceived value. Think about the search, experience, and credence attributes. Think about what information you're communicating to your customers in terms of meeting their expectations of perceived value. That is the art and science of pricing products. And if you want some more information, you might sign up for my free 7 to 10 minute weekly podcast called Marketing Munchies. It's available here on connect-to-consumer.com. That's my website. And I really appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.